All right, we went through Toronto, Boston, we went through Tampa, Florida, Ottawa. Who's next? The Detroit Red Wings. We go through Detroit coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome. It is the Locked On Sabres podcast. Joe DiBiase, thanks for everybody for making us your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including our YouTube channel, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, an exciting show to get to today, a team that I love to hate on in the Detroit Red Wings, the next subject matter for our sail across the Atlantic Division. We're going team by team, breaking down what they were last year, what their offseason looked like, and whether or not they are ahead of or behind the Sabres going into 2023-24. And next up is Detroit, or as Rob Ray likes to say, Detroit. We will go through what they did this offseason, some big trades, big signings, a very different type of build than the Sabres are going through, and also a different type of build than I think many would have expected Steve Yzerman, the Red Wings GM, to go through. So that's coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We'll compare the Sabres and the Red Wings head-to-head, and plenty more on Detroit on today's show. If you want to reach out and get a hold of us on the socials, at Sneaky Joe Sports, at Locked On Sabres on Twitter. You're also able to get a hold of us on our YouTube channel. If you go into the comment section, comment or question there, we will see it and share it on the show. Our latest from at Sens Outlook. So we got a Senators fan on the hook here for a comment on our most recent show on the Ottawa Senators, where I broke down Ottawa and really got into why I think the Sabres are slightly ahead of the Sens, but I do think both teams are on the come and that there is a very good chance that both teams could find their way into the playoffs, but at least one coming into the next season. At Sens Outlook says, I do like what you have to say here. I think the Korpisalo signing was as big as it was because it's never easy to convince free agents to come here, talking about Ottawa, so something had to give. However, when you mentioned Tarasenko being a defensive liability, which he is not great defensively, DeBrincat was a minus 31, so I can't see Tarasenko being worse. But all in all, I think both the Sens and Sabres make the playoffs next year and can see Florida due to injuries and the Islanders missing. I do think the Islanders will miss also. I do not think Florida is going to miss. The one thing I would have to say on your Tarasenko-DeBrincat comparison is don't come at me with plus minus. I don't mind you making the case that Tarasenko and DeBrincat are more comparable defensively than I gave them credit for. I said Tarasenko is one of the worst defensive forwards in the league, and DeBrincat at times can hold his own. Maybe they are closer than I made that out to be, but don't come at me with plus minus. It is 2023. We do not use plus minus anymore. But anyways, valid comment, I think, on the Sens. If you missed our episode on the Senators, wherever you get this podcast, one episode before. Today, we're going to break down the Detroit Red Wings. We'll get to what Steve Yzerman did this offseason and whether I think the Sabres are, how far ahead they are of the Red Wings this season. But starting with last year, the Red Wings finished the 22-23 season 35, 37, and 10. That was not good. It was near the bottom of the conference. It was good for second last in the Atlantic Division, only better than the Montreal Canadiens with 80 points on the season. The Red Wings, some of their advanced numbers were not strong as well. They ranked out of 32, 26th in expected goals for at 5-on-5. And that missed playoffs season by the Red Wings means that they have now missed the playoffs 7 years in a row. The Sabres drought, if they end it, the Red Wings are going to be right up there, longest drought in hockey, 7 years in a row. In fact, the last time the Detroit Red Wings made the playoffs, Henrik Zetterberg was on their team. Pavel Datsyuk was on their team. Brad Richards was on their team. Nicholas Kronwall was on their team. Ryan Miller's brother, Drew Miller, was still hanging around playing on that team. That team was ancient. Jimmy Howard, I mean, it has been a long, long long time since Detroit made their way to the playoffs. That was the 2015-16 season where they lost to the Tampa Bay Lightning in the first round. And in fact, the Red Wings have not won a playoff series since they were in the Western Conference. That's right. 2013, the Red Wings moved to the Eastern Conference. They have not won a playoff series since that happened. Their last playoff series win was over the Anaheim Ducks. It's been a long time. In fact, if you want to look at some of the players on the last team that won a playoff series for the Red Wings, Johan Franzen is a name. Valtteri Filppula is a name. Jordan Tutu, Patrick Eaves, still running around out there playing some hockey. It's been a long time. That's the point. It's been a long time. Todd Bertuzzi. Okay, wait, there's the name. I missed him. He only played 7 games that year, and that's why I missed him. The last time the Red Wings won a playoff series, Todd Bertuzzi was still playing hockey and was on their team. And it's not tracking well, in my opinion. I do not believe they're getting close to a playoff spot, but we'll get to that coming up in a little bit. Last year, they do not come close at all. 80 points put them 12 points back of a playoff spot. Dylan Larkin led the way, 79 points. They really were reliant on their veterans, which is not where you want to be. 4 of the Red Wings' top 5 scorers last season were 26 years old or older. Dylan Larkin, 26. David Perron, 34. Dominic Kubalik, 27. Andrew Kopp, 28. By the way, their goaltending, not strong either. Ville Husso, they acquired him in the offseason. He started 56 games, .896 save percentage. Ville Husso, Alex Nedeljkovic, Magnus Hellberg, the 3 goaltenders that made up the majority of their games. In fact, they were the only 3 goalies that appeared last year. All 3 had a sub-900 save percentage. All 3 struggled mightily all year. Why I'm so down on the Red Wings? I don't mind making a move here, a move there, bringing in veterans, free agents, trades to boost up your young group and get them over the top to success. The problem is all of the Red Wings' success offensively came from veterans. It was artificially inflated. Look at some of the players they've acquired over the last couple of years. You had last year a big free agent signing in Andrew Kopp, $5.6 million on a 5-year deal. You had David Perron, 35 years old, 2-year deal, $4.7 million. How about Ben Chariot at 32 years old, 4-year deal, $4.75 million. Oli Mata, 28 years old, 3 years, $3 million per year. I mentioned the Husso trade that they made. All of the guys they brought in are these aged, middle-of-the-road veterans, and the young players that were supposed to be the fuel behind the Red Wings' resurgence not only didn't take steps forward like the Sabres guys have, they took steps back. Moritz Seider, big star, defensive prospect, Calder candidacy in his first year. He went from 50 points in year 1 to 42 points in year 2. Lucas Raymond, young Swedish offensive dynamo, supposed to be the fuel behind the Red Wings resurgence. He goes down from 57 points to 45 points. In a year where everyone in the league was seeing a boost offensively, the Red Wings' 2 young stars both went down. That is a very troubling sign, if you ask me, because those 2 are the most important players on the entire Red Wings roster. I'll get to why I'm so sour on the Red Wings, and it really has to do with the job Steve Yzerman is doing as Red Wings general manager. I did not think when he was hired a couple of years ago that I would be here saying that today, but I am here saying that today. It's Yzerman's fault that I'm down on that. And I'll get to that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, what he did this offseason as well. But before we do that, we want to remind you to head over to FanDuel Sportsbook. They've got all the odds you need. In fact, I'll save this for you a little bit. The Sabres odds at FanDuel for the win the Stanley Cup, a lot higher than they are for the Detroit Red Wings. FanDuel knows what's going on that front. You got Women's World Cup going on right now. You have some big golf tournaments. You have big boxing fights and UFC fights. And, of course, you have Major League Baseball. And right now, take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel, and you get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just bet $20. You'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you could spend betting everything from the money line, the over-under, who's going to get the first home run, strikeout over-under props, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Red Wings are not our team. You can check out the Locked On Red Wings podcast if you want more on Detroit. Why I'm so down on the Red Wings? It's Yzerman. To me, it is Steve Yzerman. He is taking a few years into his build now as Red Wings GM, and I do not think he is much closer to putting the Red Wings back into contention as to when he showed up. When did he show up? I mean, we're talking now, this is 4 years. This will be the 4th year that Yzerman is the GM. And he's building almost seemingly the opposite way that he used to in Tampa. Tampa, it was all about nailing late round picks. And he hasn't had all the time in the world to do that with the Red Wings. But if you look at the Lightning and the timeline that it took the Lightning to get on track after he showed up, I mean, he gets hired in 2010, the 2010 offseason, his first season as Lightning general manager. The Lightning made it to the conference finals where they lost in Game 7 to the Bruins. They were 1 game away from the Stanley Cup. Then, yes, they went to the bottom for a couple of years. Year 4, they were back in the playoffs. And then forever after, they've made the playoffs every year except one. They've been in the finals multiple times, but right out of the gates in Tampa, Yzerman had his team in the conference finals 1 game away from the Stanley Cup, and 2 years later, they were right back in the playoffs. And the Red Wings have not even really been close to the playoffs under Yzerman. Why is that? Well, I don't want to quite write off his drafting. They don't have the production yet. 4 years in, I think you'd like to see more than you got. You know, Seider and Raymond, I'm still a believer in those two being great players. They just took steps back last year. So I'm a believer in those two, but that's it. And you got to have more on your resume than that. The good news is it appears as though there's another wave of drafts coming, of prospects coming for the Lightning. Everywhere you look, they have one of the highest ranked prospect pools. I saw, Yahoo had them ranked as the number 3 prospect pool in hockey. Scott Wheeler of The Athletic had the Red Wings ranked as the number 4 prospect pool in hockey. Those prospects, though, are still a year or two away, even the first wave, I think, from showing up. So this is not an immediate solution, but maybe a future solution for Detroit. And in the meantime, they're kind of getting stuck in these bad contracts, or they're at least overpaying for middle-of-the-road free agents. And this offseason, they continued that trend. I mentioned last offseason that they did it with David Perron, and they did it with Andrew Kopp and Ben Chariot and Ville Husso. Well, they dove right back in this offseason. JT Compher, 5 years, $5.1 million a year. I like JT Compher. He's a good middle six centerman, great defensively. I just cannot get there on $5.1 million. I think he's about a $3.5 million hockey player. And to give him 5 years at that cap hit, to me, was a way overpayment by Detroit. Shane Gostisbehere, 1 year, $4.1 million. Maybe a little bit of an overpayment for Gostisbehere, but at least it's only 1 year on that front. The player that they added that's a veteran that I like this idea that they pulled off was the Alex DeBrincat trade. Now, I don't even know how much credit I want to give Yzerman, though, because DeBrincat, who's from Michigan, made it clear he wanted to go home. So they kind of walked into that one. They really didn't have to do anything to get DeBrincat, but they did get the job done. They made the trade. They signed him to a 4-year, $7.8 million contract and probably will plug him right in on their top line. But listen, that's a player that couldn't put Ottawa over the top. So why Why am I supposed to believe he's so good that he'll put Detroit over the top? I like DeBrincat. Nice player, 30-plus goal scorer. He'll help. He's better than Dominic Kubalik, who they traded away to get DeBrincat, but no, not a core foundational player that I'm expecting to fuel Detroit getting back to the playoffs. So I don't like their offseason. I like the DeBrincat trade, hate the Compher contract, and I guess Gostisbehere is all right. But to me, it wasn't what they should have wanted. Justin Hall, also, by the way, who was easily the Leafs' worst defenseman. Holy cow, 3 years, $3.4 million. That might be the worst contract that they have on their books. I can't believe that player got $3.4 million. And again, Hall, who is 31 years old, Yzerman's just throwing money wherever he can get it. He's spending it like he's got those Florida state income taxes to benefit himself still. And I just don't see it. I don't see what Yzerman is doing. It's confusing to me. And I don't like the job he's doing. And what's dangerous about having a legendary player in charge of your team, and he's making some wrong decisions, it is very awkward to have that situation, because firing that guy is not easy. It's not just, we get rid of him. To make a football comparison, the Denver Broncos with John Elway went through 5-6 years of him doing a horrific job. And I mean, they couldn't really move on from him because it's John Elway. He's a god in Denver. And Yzerman is that in Detroit. Not to say they would want to fire him already, but if 2-3 years go by and this thing's not on track, I would struggle to think that they'll have an easy time getting out from him. So we'll see what happens with Yzerman. But I do not like the build that he has going. Are these struggles with Yzerman enough to have the Red Wings at the basement of the Atlantic? I'll compare them to the Sabres and how far ahead I think Buffalo is than Detroit when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Welcome back to the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Time to compare the Sabres and the Red Wings. How far ahead is Buffalo over Detroit? And yes, I think it should be assumed that the Sabres are above the Red Wings. I think their team is deeper. I think their team is actually more top-heavy even. The Red Wings' top two lines going into the year, Daily Faceoff projects at Dylan Larkin, Alex DeBrincat, Lucas Raymond. Okay, I like that line. JT Compher, David Perron, and Jonathan Berggren. Not a fan. That is a bad second line. That's not even an underwhelming second line. To me, that is a bad second line, and far worse than Thompson, Skinner, Tuck, and far worse than Cousins, Peterka, and whoever you want to throw in there, Casey Middlestat. The Red Wings are plus 5,500 at our friends at FanDuel to win the Stanley Cup. The Sabres are at plus 4,000. That is significantly higher. Last year, head-to-head, the Sabres went 4-0 against the Detroit Red Wings. They swept the season series. And in those four matchups, the Sabres beat the Red Wings 26-16. 26-16. The Sabres in 4 games against Detroit averaged 6.5 goals a game. The Red Wings could not stop Buffalo head-to-head last year. The Sabres scored 8 goals, 5 goals, 6 goals, and 7 goals against the Red Wings last season. I think it is clear that the Sabres are a better hockey team. They are better on the short term and are better on the long term than the Red Wings. And I think you could even point to Montreal up and coming as a team that could pass the Red Wings. Couldn't think you can make a serious argument that the team I'd least want to be for the next 3 to 5 years in the Atlantic Division might be the Detroit Red Wings. They really got a hit on these prospects, and they might. But I think you could make an argument that they are last in the Atlantic Division as soon as this season. Montreal, again, they got to get some goaltending. But to be fair, the Red Wings didn't have the goaltending last year either. I had the stat earlier that they had 3 goalies last year, none of which reached .900 save percentage. So Sabres, to me, far ahead of the Red Wings. I would expect the Sabres to be flirting with 100 points and competing for a playoff spot. And the Red Wings last year at 80, I don't expect them to be any better than that. In fact, with the Sabres getting better and the Senators getting better, and I think the Panthers are going to have a better regular season, maybe that evens out with Boston coming back down to earth. In fact, it probably does. I think 80 is another good projection for the Red Wings. They added a couple of pieces, so maybe I'd be willing to go a little bit higher into like the mid 80s, but I don't see the Red Wings being a team that is alive in the final weeks of the season competing for a playoff spot. I see them as a team that's eliminated by about February, and that nobody is taking seriously as a playoff contender by the new year. That's how I see the Red Wings. I think the Sabres are far ahead of them. I think the Senators are far ahead of them, and it's possible the Canadiens are ahead of them as well. I think it's a terrible job so far that Steve Yzerman has done in Detroit. That's it for us on the Locked On Sabres podcast today. Next up, we'll go through the Montreal Canadiens. If you agree with me on Detroit, if you think I am overstating how bad they are on the next couple of years, how bad the moves are that they've been, let me know. Let me know if you think I'm wrong. At Sneaky Joe Sports, at Locked On Sabres, or again on our YouTube channel. And again, for you everydayers, next up, we'll go through Montreal and what their build looks like. You know, they've got some high prospects, some top picks that are going to be coming through the gates. So we'll go through the Canadiens next time here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day.